The Job Fairness Act has just gone into effect in Colorado. And guess what? There are a few other states that also have a similar act. Well, how does it apply to you? We're going to talk to one of the women who is responsible for getting this act to the right place. I don't know if it's Congress or Senate, but then also helping to push it and to get it passed so that we and ageism can hopefully be eradicated, especially when it comes to getting hired, actually getting the interview and getting hired. We are going to talk about how this can affect you in a very positive way if you are a job seeker. So today, we're going to brush up a little bit on ageism and how it's affecting millions upon millions of people globally, by the way. And we're going to talk with Janine again about the Job Fairness Act, which took effect yesterday. And then we're going to leave you with some career-seeking strategies because it's time to get it going. I tell you what, this act is a godsend to so many who are seeking, are about to seek, and ready to switch careers altogether. Well, I'm Barbara Brooks, your podcast host of the Second Act. And I'm your age-positive spokesperson and speaker and entrepreneur, the woman behind the amazing community and company called SecondAct Women. Google it. And find us on Facebook inside of our community. It's a huge 21,000 person community, all told. So listen, this podcast is like an 80s mixtape. We talk entrepreneurship, career, and life after 50 plus. So this is the Second Act, and let's get into it. All right, let's fill your brain with ageism in the workplace stats. Sadly, it is a crisis in America today. Well, you know what? It's a crisis globally. Ask Jacinth Bassett in the UK and some of our friends in Australia and Canada. This is a global crisis. Here's why I say it's a crisis. Let me give an example. What do you think 100, 5, and 0 stands for? You know what it stands for? Those are my numbers. I sent over 100 resumes at one point, only to get 5 interviews, only then to get what? 0 interviews. And I'm an award-winning marketing director. What's up with that? Like globally award-winning in the International Council of Shopping Centers. So what's up with that? I'm only 57, and at the time I was only 51. Well, you know what I did? I started a company to help other people. That's where Second Act Women came in. But that's not the story of so many people. They don't want to start companies. They want to work. We are not expiring. Women don't expire. There's no age stop. Look at Carol Burnett. Look at Rita Moreno. They are racking up the new jobs. So here's the deal. We got to stop ageism in America. And today, of course, we're talking about the workplace. So women over 55, the unemployment rate soared 4 years ago today. And we know what it was 4 years ago. It was the pandemic. And I can imagine it continues to soar, but we'll find out from Janine. Jobless women are 18%. Yeah. Here we go. Jobless women are 18% less likely to find new work between 50 and 61 than we were when we were, I guess, in our prime. No, not so much because I'm in my prime now. 25 to 34. Now, according to research by the Urban Institute, here's another stat for you. People 62 or older are 50% less likely to be rehired. A high percentage of hiring managers have admitted to hiring younger. And younger, I mean below 39. And ageism today, at least in the tech world, starts at 35. So it's only getting worse. Now, what do you think why they're not hiring us? Yeah, you guessed it. They think we're tech challenged. They think we're too expensive. We're not a culture fit. We're ready to retire. All those things are completely untrue. Heck, I I just built my own website, barbarabrooks.com, and that will prove to you that at 57, I like tech. I'm good at tech. I enjoy it. I always have. 75% of women over 45 have reported that their age has put them at a disadvantage when looking for work. And we can't do anything about age because age is living. How in the world are we supposed to live our lives and put money back into the economy, which, by the way, women particularly over 50, are the ones driving the economy? But if we continue to not be hired, then what's going to happen with the global economy? Well, let's get into the Job Fairness Act of Colorado. We live longer, we work longer, or at least we'd like to work longer, so hire us, resulting in an unprecedented transformation in the modern workplace. Y'all know there are 5 generations in the workplace today. If we continue to be hired, there's the Z, millennials, Gen X, boomers, and of course, the traditionalists. Those are the 5 generations that are represented in the workplace today. Well, I'm bringing on today's guest, which is Janine Vanderburg. Janine, I'm so happy to have you here today.
Barbara, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for asking me.
We are fighting the good fight, and you are a pro-aging expert, spokesperson, and speaker yourself, and you are being hired across the country and probably globally to speak inside of corporations and events and the such. But today, and it's about ageism, you're schooling them on reframing what age is today. But you also are an encore champion, being a former lawyer yourself and a longtime community activist. You've also started that campaign, Changing the Narrative, which has gotten numerous awards, started back in 2018. And so I welcome you because you are one of the people that were able to get this Job Fairness Act passed. So let's take a step back. What is this act and how did it come about?
Okay, so thank you for having me and for that lovely introduction. So the Job Application Fairness Act, which went into effect yesterday, was actually passed in Colorado in 2023. So we've waited a year for implementation, but it was the result of a group. So it was a coalition. I'm one member of a coalition of people who came together, and they came together around recognizing that very often when we're talking about public policy and older people, we tend to talk about transportation, we talk about long-term care, we talk about healthcare. I'm not saying those things aren't important.
Right.
You rarely address the elephant in the room of ageism in the workplace. So came together in 2019, and this is like the kind of 3rd or 4th thing that we've done. So we strengthened Colorado's age discrimination laws. But this particular was important because when I started Changing the Narrative in 2018, every time I did a workshop and I talked about ageism and we mentioned workplace, somebody would come up to me and say, you know, that ageism thing you're talking about, it happened to me, happened to my partner, happened to my dad. Somebody came up to me and said, they're asking for my high school graduation date. And I'm like, well, why would anybody ask for your high school graduation date, except maybe after your first job at McDonald's?
Yeah.
Like, why is that relevant? Why is that important? And so I got online myself to apply for a job I had absolutely no interest in. I think it was some sort of long haul driving or something. And it was, and sure enough, they were asking for my high school graduation date, except the really interesting thing was my high school graduation date wasn't even listed. So I was like, well, clearly they don't want people in their 60s and older. So that kind of planted the seed. And then a few years ago, we talked to a woman from the AARP in Connecticut and realized that they had gotten a bill passed that banned employers from asking for age or graduation dates. And so our older worker policy collaborative, after talking, said, okay, we can do this in Colorado. So literally we got together, talked to legislators, got the bill drafted. So this was legislation passed in the Colorado State Legislature. We had 4 amazing sponsors and other people came on after. But basically what the bill does is bans employers on initial job applications. I'll talk a little bit more about why
Mm,
that's important. On
okay.
initial job applications for asking for our age, our birth date, any graduation date, because graduation date, right? If somebody knows your high
Yeah.
school graduation date, they can kind of pretty much figure out how old you are. College
Right.
graduation dates, or asking other questions that could be age identifiers. So, for example,
Oh.
if someone was disingenuous and said, "Well, I'm not going to ask for your age or graduation date, but I'll ask you, what was the first year that you voted, or something like that," right? So,
Yeah.
so anyway, it bans employers from asking any of that on initial job applications. And then it goes on to say, like, even if they ask you to submit a resume, employers need to let you know that you can redact that information from your resume and you're not going to be penalized for it. So all of that is both in the legislation, and then the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment put out some regulations that further define for employers exactly what you can do and what you can't do. What employers can do, because we know that there are some jobs that require that you be of a certain age. So, for example, if you're going to serve liquor in a bar,
Oh.
someone can, so they can't ask you your age, but they can say, are you going to be of this age by the time this job starts? So it's very
Oh.
they're not asking you that age, but they're asking you if you're going to be of legal age. But that's only if it's a
Mm.
bona fide occupational qualification. So you can't all of a sudden decide to be a marketer of a shopping center. You've got to be X a certain age or that kind of thing, and ask someone if they're that age. It's got to be a bona fide occupational qualification. So it's, to me, it's a
Okay.
huge win for job seekers in Colorado.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think it's actually a win for employers. We know
Oh, do tell.
you cited some of the data, but we know, like, the most recent resume builder surveys, like over 40% of hiring managers actually admitted that they screen people out based on age. And not only do they screen out older people, but they also screen out younger people, people aged 25 and under.
The
That's what
reverse ageism that happens that we've all experienced.
exactly. So knowing that, so this, to me, if you're an employer, it gives us an opportunity to educate employers about the law and about the business case for older workers and intergenerational teams, but it also protects an employer from a hiring manager who may be ageist, right? So it's
Yeah.
they're not going to be able to screen out anymore based on age. And I think for older job seekers, it gives us an opportunity to get in there, to get past that screening place and get in an interview and show what we can do. So I think
Yeah.
it's just a win-win all around. And that's going to be a win for the economy as well.
It absolutely is. And what's interesting to me is, and I wonder what is your take on this? So let's talk about the resume. Two things came to mind. Um, so one of my friends is someone that you know, but I won't say online.
Okay.
She has been seeking a job for a very long time now, about a year now, and has actually been able to get the interviews and get so far, but hasn't been able. And she started recognizing she was getting some of those interviews now because she was only going back 10 years.
Yeah.
Because what she was seeing in the job descriptions is they were going up to 10 years. We're seeking someone with 10 years of experience versus saying 15 years or 20 years. So is your recommendation that we just not go the 12 or 15 as we've been told by some, just end it with 10 years, which, by the way, I've said before, is a shame that we can't own our years of service.
Right. So, Barbara, one of the things, and I feel very conflicted about it because, as you know, I'm nationally known as being an anti-ageism activist. And
Right.
so, but when I'm talking to job seekers, I'm often giving advice that would be perceived as reinforcing ageism. And to me, it's in the category of both things can be true. It
Yes.
can be true that I'm going to fight on a policy level to have stronger age discrimination laws. And I'm going to educate employers about the business case, the very strong business case for older workers and intergenerational teams. And I also recognize that older friends need jobs. And
Yes.
if the way to do it is to shave years off your resume, absolutely do that. So two things can be true. We can do what we have to do to get by in the moment. And we can also collectively fight for more age inclusive policies.
Yeah.
And I also
I agree because
15. I don't have an opinion on that. I mean, I think it's, to me, the most important thing. And I know you talk a lot about sort of personal branding and really identifying what your unique value proposition is. I
yeah.
think it's understanding how your value really aligns with what the employer is looking for and making a really good match there, and not randomly, sending out resumes everywhere, because we know that doesn't.
Yeah, you can't spray and pray. Many of the uh, career experts within our organization of SecondAct had said that. Be very strategic, even still. And the reason why the business case is so important is because the research that I have here from AARP says that $850 billion, and this is in 2018, $850 billion is lost in the economy because of ageism of workers over 50.
Yeah.
850 billion lost.
Barbara, that's the big number, right? And we
Right.
can all look at that. And then we can also all looking at what's going on in our communities. Think of like restaurants who have to like shorten their hours, right? Because they don't have people to make their shifts, and yet they're not hiring older people. Think of businesses that can't achieve their growth potential because there aren't enough youngins here. I mean, what I like to do in my workshops is show, I'll do it with my hands now because I don't have my slides.
Yeah.
But this is the demographic pyramid of the United States in 1960, right? Whole lot of younger people tapering up to a very small number of older people. Here's what it looks like in 2060, right? So what we know is, if we want to fill our talent pipelines, we need to be thinking about a pipeline strategy that has multiple generations, that looks at things like reciprocal mentoring and how do we include everyone and have strategies that can do that. And so it starts with, to me, it starts with not screening people out. And that's why the Job Application Fairness Act is so important. One of the things that struck me in some of the conversations I've had about this is that employers who were interviewed said, well, we don't want to hire older workers because we think they're not going to stick around. And we know that's not true, right?
Yeah.
On average, older workers have 4 times the tenure of younger people. And we don't want to hire younger people because they're not going to stick around. And we're not going to provide professional development to either group. Well, what does that leave you with? If you're not providing professional development to your staff, your customers are being shortchanged, right? It's kind of like this bizarre thinking. So to me, what you and I need to do that's so valuable is we need to continue to be out there. We need to educate employers about the business case. And I'm excited about the immediate benefit of this act because it is going to pressure employers to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But I'm also excited about the opportunity, the increased opportunity that it gives us to talk to employers about, why older workers are good for business.
Yes. And what are some of the corporations, as you're going into corporations, and again, they're being asked, they're seeking you, what is their concern? Do you find that some of them understand that they need to do this, or are you truly going in and saying, all right, here's the deal?
I think it's all over the map. So obviously, if somebody is totally unwilling, they're not calling me, right? Because
that's true.
they can look me up on LinkedIn, Janine Vanderburg, and they're going to see that I'm an anti-ageism person.
Right.
That's what I say. But I think the people who reach out to me, mostly on LinkedIn, they're employers who realize that when they've thought about their inclusion efforts, they haven't thought about age as part of it. There are employers who are realizing what you indicated earlier in your remarks, Barbara, that there is such a thing as the longevity economy. There are people age 50 and over, and when you don't have older people, let's say as part of your marketing team, you may make huge marketing mistakes. I'm not going to name companies here.
Yeah, we know.
We've all seen some, right? Where you're like, really? That was supposed to appeal to me? Like, what are you?
Yes.
I've got money, but I'm not spending it with you.
Right.
So I think there's an element of that. There are very often when I'm asked to go into a company, it's someone within the company, and they're not necessarily at the C-level, but somebody within the company who has the ear of people, who's a champion, who recognizes that the company, and this is also true for public sector or nonprofit sector, there's somebody within the organization who realizes we could do better if we were age inclusive. I mean, a recent company that I spoke to, the issue was they actually had 5 generations in the workplace, and they were seeing intergenerational conflict, and they didn't know what to do with it, right? But
Oh,
they were facing intergenerational conflict because the stereotypes are allowed to linger, right? If you and I look at each other and we just
oh,
look at each other with stereotypes
yes,
instead of looking at each other as people, then
yes.
that's not going to be good for the company. That, the stereotypes that are in the larger society carry through
Mhm.
to our organization. So those are some of the reasons. And,
Yeah,
and sometimes I think it's random. I'm like, oh, really?
yeah,
I'm happy to chat with you. I'm not sure why I'm here, but because
right.
no, I mean, there are
Yeah.
companies that are doing a really good job. So,
Okay, here's a question then. If they are finding, if someone is working in an intergenerational workplace currently, and they too want to be an advocate, but are experiencing stereotyping, what can you say to them to start the communication, or what are some of the tools or tips that you would give that person who can maybe bubble it up to someone to say, hey, I've got some ideas on how we can work better together?
yeah. Well, I mean, without, going into a full-on workshop,
Yeah,
because we have limited time.
the whole thing. Yeah.
A recent workshop I did, I started with a really simple activity, and there was very much an intergenerational gathering in the room, and this was an in-person workshop. And I started by having, not with the agenda, not here's who I am, not none of that stuff. I was like, everybody turn to someone sitting next to you. You've got 3 minutes. I had my chimes ready to chime it out. You have 3 minutes to identify at least one thing you have in common. So buzz, buzz,
Love
buzz.
it.
And then it was fascinating. So I, ring my chimes. I'm like, okay, so what did we find out? And people had, sports teams, favorite restaurants, places they like to travel. They both had some experience in college, whatever it was. I was
Yeah.
like, how many of you picked your age? None. How many of you picked the generation that you were in? None. So that kind of set the tone to, okay, what we're going to do in this workshop is dispel this thing that generational stereotypes exist, are valid, because we now know all the science and all the emerging data is showing that generational stereotypes are just that. They're
Yeah.
assumptions. They're not borne out by science. That's why, for example, the Pew Charitable Trust stopped using generational labels, and a lot of people are just saying, let's do away with generational labels altogether. So, I mean,
Ah,
the big idea is this: there's so many things that we can do to address ageism in the workplace. We can counter stereotypes. We can do more employer education. We can educate ourselves about what stereotypes are. And we ourselves can go online and take the implicit association test off the Harvard University website and see if we ourselves are biased against younger and older people.
mm,
And we can share our stories. One of the things that was powerful when we were um, championing the Job Application Fairness Act was we were able to get a few people to come and tell their stories. Now, a lot of us, as we're older, if we're experiencing workplace age discrimination and we're still in the hunt, we don't want to share our story, right? Because we think there's going to be a
mhm.
stigma attached.
Yes.
But there were a few courageous people who were willing to share their story on media, testify to state legislators, and that testimony moved, I think, legislators in a way that we have all the data, right? We have all the stats. You've cited
Yeah. But to hear it.
it in all my article, but it's different. It's different to hear the stat. And it's another thing to hear a woman who's said, I've always worked, I've contributed taxes, I've contributed to the state, I've contributed to the economy,
Mm,
and I couldn't get a job for 14 months despite doing advanced credentialing and all of that kind of thing. So
yes.
that's one of the things that all of us can do, is both speak up and encourage our friends to speak up. And the other thing, the beauty of this act as well, is that there's now a complaint procedure. So
Oh,
I'm
okay. Uh-oh. Oh, we just lost her. I'm sure she will be back. She lives on the north on the west side in Colorado. And for those of you that are listening or watching, we just lost Janine, probably a little short in the internet. And if we don't get her back, in the next minute or so, I will go ahead and go and give you some really great career strategies. And so, and actually, why don't we do that while we wait for her to come back on? So, oh, here she is. All right. There she is.
Just popped out. Anyway, when I wrote an article on LinkedIn at this topic, and it's got like links to where you can find the regulations for employers, so employers know what to do and not to do. And I'm not going to put that link in the chat, which is what I was trying to do when I got. But
you can email it.
I'll email it to you and you can maybe share it after. But the other thing is that there's a link to a complaint form, and you can complain anonymously because so if you see, literally starting yesterday, if you see an application that asks you to give your graduation date, your age, your birth date, any other age identifiers, you can complain to the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, and they have a really easy to fill out complaint form. The employer, if a complaint is issued, the employer has 15, so there is an immediate penalty, right? The employer has an opportunity to make it right. So they have 15 days to make it right. But then if they don't, then fines start kicking in. So I think it's an important step. And I'd encourage all of us to gently educate employers that we know and just say, check your applications and make sure that you're not asking for age or graduation dates or other age identifiers.
I love that. And again, the complaint, people have to be reminded, is completely blind. It's not as if your name's going to be associated.
You can put your name on it if you want, but there's an option to fill it out anonymously.
Yeah. And I think you should do, and I like that they're given 15 days. They're not immediately given a fine. They're given a few days to make it right. And then if they don't, then go after them again, because we've got to make this right. My question to you is, how did you start your advocacy work? Because considering you were a lawyer, what kind of a lawyer were you? And I've known you for a couple of years now.
So my parents would have said I kind of came out saying it's not fair. But what I ended up doing was, kind of turning my law degree, and I founded what I called a social sector consulting firm. So basically for over 3 decades before I started changing the narrative, I was working with leading change makers around the country on social change. I was working with organizations, foundations, nonprofits, government entities, social enterprises, social purpose businesses on how to orchestrate organizational change. So the idea of change was just like in my DNA. So when I started changing the narrative, I initially thought it was just going to be about changing our language and our messaging. And then I was like, no, this is like the stuff I did before. We need to change public policies. We need to change people's attitudes and that kind of thing. The specific, though, advocacy around workplace, because changing the narrative has done a lot of things. We talk about ageism in popular culture. We talk about ageism in healthcare, right? We did a birthday card campaign and that kind of thing. But specifically, the workplace thing really mattered to me because an area of my advocacy throughout my life, it's why I started a consulting firm, has really been around women and women's economic security. The password for my consulting company used to be 25 smart women, right? I think we should have 5 employees in before we hired men, and that, but it very similar issue. We realized that women, especially women who were having families, work often didn't work for us, right? So it was kind of an alternative for that. And so the whole idea of how ageism was affecting older women and our economic security. I mean, Barbara, I was meeting people your age, my age, who are trying to live on $500 and $600 a month of Social Security. And these women who had done stuff in their lives, like many women, stepped out of the workforce to caregive for children, stepped out of the workforce to caregive for older family members. I know you're caregiving for your mom now. This is, and it's a real thing. So it means, less savings, less 401k, smaller amounts of Social Security, all those things. So it's like the tie of ageism to an issue that I've always cared about, women's rights, women's issues, women's economic security, was really strong. So
that makes sense. Okay, so that's how your advocacy started. By the way, it is National Sandwich Generation Month, July is, which is me. I don't have kids, but I am on the caregiving side, as you said,
Yeah.
for my mother. So how can late stage career changers set themselves apart? Can you give us just a few things
So I
before
can
we?
give a few things, but I really think this is the area that you're really strong in. So I tend to work more on the systems and policy level, but here's what I know from the people that I've talked to. That the first part of it is we can't let ageist beliefs, we are surrounded by ageist beliefs, right? You're too
Yeah,
old, you're too old. And so we can't let those ageist beliefs infiltrate our own thinking and start thinking, I'm too old to start this, to learn this, to do this. You know,
right.
I was 65 when I started changing the narrative, 71 this year as I'm starting this, just more focused on the workplace and Encore roadmap and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and I was in my mid 30s when I started my first company. So like
Wow.
startup is in my blood.
Wow.
And but knowing that there's no reason to stop starting up, and I'll probably, do another
Keep
one,
going.
keep going. But
Yeah.
we can't allow the ageist beliefs of I'm to learn to do this. I just started on, I've always been fascinated by social media. So I really related to what you said about tech. I've always loved tech. I love social media. Just
Right.
started, kind of a digital marketing course because I'm like, I've always loved to do this. Suppose I actually learned the right way to do it. And that
Right. Right.
I think it's important for us to not let that kind of stuff get in the way. I do think it's important for people to get really of any age, to get really current on anything tech, certainly anything digital, certainly be up to speed on AI. It doesn't, it doesn't mean that you need to understand all the back end and all the things about how it works, but I think we all need to be conversant with the tools and how they work and that kind of thing, and
Yes.
understand their implications, both positive and negative, for our work.
Mhm.
I think what's really important, and this is why I think, women's communities like you do, like Kimmy Gildner does, like others do,
Mhm.
Diana Place, are so important. We need the support of other women because we've got
Yes.
so many people out there telling us, not going to work. And very often, I think, I've talked to a lot of women who even, may have partners who are supportive, but just say, why are you even bothering? Just, let it go, let it go. And,
Yeah.
if you still want to do something, you need to do something.
Yeah.
So I think forming supportive communities, I mean, the actual specific strategies we've talked a little bit about how to get your resumes through the door, how to get applications through the door. Another resource I highly recommend is we have federally funded workforce development centers. Those are our tax dollars at work. We
Mhm.
need to look at the ones, and they're available in every community. We need to call them and see, do they have programs for people age 50 plus? If they do, great. We can
Yeah.
access those resources for free. And if they don't, we need to, again, become advocates and say, why not?
Yes.
And what can we do to encourage you?
Yes. That's
So
a great point. Do you know if Colorado's workplaces?
no, we have some wonderful, I'm some wonderful workforce development and in the Metro Denver area,
Yeah.
Boulder with Lisa Jensen, Broomfield with Clelia McVeigh, Denver with Teresa Fallagrady. I'm not sure who's in Jefferson County right now, but Arapahoe Douglas works. So the
Mm,
metro area has been really strong, but the
good.
reason they've been really strong is because there are a lot of people age 50 and over who are facing the same situation that you did, that people in your community have, and they have shown up at workforce centers. I mean, I've ended up, a number of workforce centers have had me come out and talk about how do we position older workers and that kind of things.
Yeah. No, you know what? That's great advice for people that are seeking, that they should look for those free sources. And so I'm going to put that in the show notes because that's actually a great idea. And for those that are listening or watching that are not in Colorado, the other states are California, Connecticut, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania that have
That have
similar acts.
and Barbara, I can also send you a link where anybody in any location can find their latest workforce development center. So I'll send that to you
Yes.
after.
Please do. Please do. I want to say thank you. And can you share with them where they can find you before we say goodbye? Where can
You
they
got,
find you?
they can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm basically LinkedIn Janine Vanderburg.
You sure are.
Spelling right here. And then also my new company is called Encore Roadmap. So encoreroadmap.com. I do not have your website building skills, so mine is still a bit under development, but it's a work in progress, and I'm actually headed out on vacation when I come back. That's a top priority for the end of July. So anyway,
Well, good for you. Well, you know what I did? I moved over from WordPress, which was difficult and not easy for the non,
yeah,
person who really is a web developer, to Squarespace. And I'm going to move SecondAct Women's site over to Squarespace to update it as well. And so that was very helpful. But I do recommend anybody who's listening, do not build your own site if marketing and all of that is not your background. Please go to a professional. So I want to say thank you. Thank you. And as I've said to you before in texts and things, that you are a mentor of mine. And I appreciate you being there for me. And it's been fun serving on panels with you as well. And I'm sure there's many more ahead. And
I
so
think
thank
there's
you.
many more. And Barbara, I really appreciate your kind of shouting out, particularly this legislation, but overall the cause of workplace age discrimination. We need to educate people about it, and we need to encourage employers. Don't do it. You're missing out.
You're
So,
missing out on us.
no.
Thank you,
Okay.
Janine. Have a
Okay.
great vacation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
So you heard it there. If you are looking and you live even outside of Colorado, look for your federally funded workplace development centers who can help you. And if they do not have things that are focused on the late stage career person, then we need to talk to them, right? So here's a few strategies as I come to an end. I just wanted to leave you with a few things. I want you to think about performing your own career audit, and that's taking inventory and identifying your strengths, as we like to say, your power strengths, which are what used to be called soft skills, because I like to call them power skills, your hard skills, and how they can add value to your next move. But also create a summary of your work. If you have not edited or looked at your CV as of late, go ahead and pull that out and bring it up to date. And or just get an old school pen and paper out and really jot down a summary of your work and who you are, what do you plan to, what are you seeking, and also the benefits that they would have bringing you on board. It's coming down to personal branding, understanding who you are, but also it is creating your own brand statement so that when people are asking what you do today, and even if you're job seeking, you're able to rattle that off the top of your head in a statement that clearly identifies what you're looking to achieve, what you're looking for. Two more things. Develop a gap analysis. So if you have not been working for a certain amount of time because perhaps you've been caregiving on either end, or you've taken time off to grow your kids, to raise your kids, or whatever it may be, make sure that you're doing your own gap analysis and create what you've learned, the classes you've took. And if you haven't, then the next one is get some courses under your belt. Go ahead and maybe make time once a month to go on to Meetup or LinkedIn Learning or someplace, YouTube, to learn something new. And lastly is doing your research and networking. And networking isn't just about going to your LinkedIn network and saying, can I take a meeting with you, an informational meeting? There's that. But there's also, you're there to learn something new. So perhaps there is a new industry that you would like to tap into. Then make meetings with those people, and you're networking to really learn, not perhaps to land a job with that company, which could happen. So I want to say thank you today. I want to remind you, you are unstoppable, and that the 40s are the new fabulous. The 50s are fierce. And if you're over 60, you are a force. Thank you for joining me today, and make it a blessed day. Join me every Thursday morning at 9 a.m. live on YouTube, or get this anywhere you can get your podcasts. Have a blessed day, everyone.